and welcome back to Series 3 of Nutrition Science Bites. Have I got a special guest for you today? Today I'm talking to Professor Louise Baur. Now, I've known Louise since last century actually, but Louise is a leading light in Australia, not only in terms of obesity research and clinical practice, but also as a paediatrician. Here's just some of Louise's achievements. She's the immediate past president of the World Obesity Federation. She's consulted to the World Health Organization on a range of issues. She's a senior academic at the University of Sydney, and importantly, she's a paediatrician at the Children's Hospital at Westmead. And Louise has dedicated her life to working with children, adolescents, and their families to improve their health, and more recently, a leading light in really promoting optimal weight related health for kids, families, and adults. So, welcome, Louise.
Hello, Claire.
It's amazing how I think I first met you back in early 1990, and I remember inviting you to come to Newcastle to give a seminar on childhood obesity because the data at that time showed there was increasing prevalence. And, I naively thought, we'll get Louise up and we'll be able to do something about it right here and now, not really realizing that this would be an issue we're still talking about and still talking about what to do, some 25, 30 years later.
It's a very, very big issue in many ways. I didn't mean to make a joke about it. What I mean is it's complex.
Mm,
Obesity doesn't arise simply. There's a very strong biological basis to it, which is influenced by a range of factors in our broader community. And when you think of what's happened over the past few decades to the world in which we, and particularly our children, live, you can see dramatic changes. So the rise of sedentary pursuits, the ubiquity of screens, the change in our food environments, and more, and just general stress
yeah.
all happening.
Yeah, and it's all compounded at once, isn't it? One of the things I think adds, Louise, is that, like if you think about young families today, they they weren't around as young families 30 years ago. So I think people who are working out what to put in children's lunchboxes today, they don't know that we never had little packets of stuff. So I think it makes it extra hard to know historically how did people used to eat? How did they used to move? So it really does compound it.
I so agree. When you take a bit of time to ask the parent, or if there happens to be a grandparent there, about what they used to eat, what they used to take to school in their lunch boxes, it's so very, very different. The force of marketing is profound. Parents think it is absolutely normal to have two or three little packaged snacks in their lunch boxes. There are whole aisles of the supermarkets dedicated to that. It is normalized, but it wasn't around, certainly when I was a child. That was quite a while ago. And certainly when my parents and grandparents were around, and we all managed to grow up into healthy, functioning adults
We
somehow
did.
or other.
We absolutely did. And one of the challenges I wanted to ask you about is actually with the word obesity itself. Now, I know you've been one of the authors of a recent publication. Listeners, it was called the Lancet Commission, and that is like mega fancy at the world level. But Louise was part of a group who brought together 76, 75, 76 organizations to agree on a new way to think about the word obesity. So why why did that need to happen? Why did you need to work for years and years with this international group to hone in on what is this word obesity and what do we do about it and its definition?
The world, the word obesity can mean many different things, and it's used in different ways and can be used quite pejoratively as well. So we can use the word to mean in an epidemiological sense, and we use it to say there's this amount of obesity in a general population compared with 20 years ago, or there's this amount of obesity in this country compared with that country. And we can use it, it's a very academic, scientific way of talking about it. But it can also be used clinically. So when you're talking to your family doctor or to others to say your high blood pressure is related to your obesity. But it starts to become seen as a very, but people can misunderstand that language as well. So I think it can be used epidemiologically, clinically, and also in a very stigmatizing way.
Yeah, Louise, I kind of think of it like epidemiology was just the study of characteristics of populations. I kind of think when it's used in that way, it's almost like equally the next sentence could be, and in that country, there's 50 white cars on the street at any given time. It's just a totally emotionless descriptive thing. And I think maybe some misunderstandings arise when it is used as like, here's your high blood pressure, here's your how your adiposity or your obesity level is defined. But I think sometimes how it's heard is not like that. Like just the sound of the word, it can sound like more like you're calling somebody a name, isn't it?
I've had many patients who've told me about their experience with other doctors, and I've had friends tell me that they've been called obese. And I've had several families say, I thought they were saying that my child was an animal, was a beast. So, first of all, it doesn't get heard. And then when it
Ah.
is heard, it's seen in a very, very negative way. I sometimes wonder whether whatever word we use to talk about people who've got very high body fat, whether that word itself will become stigmatizing because it's the condition that we relate to, and it's very easy for us as a community to stigmatize people of high weight and high body fat.
So perhaps then it's about just being sensitive to the emotion that can be attached to that word, and maybe for clinicians realizing that patients may not hear it the way you're intending. And I always kind of think it seems easier to me to discuss weight related health, or whether you talk about adiposity, which is just again the fancy word for the composition of body fat, but weight related health, because surely that's why people come to see you, Louise, or bring their children to see a pediatrician, because they're concerned about their health and well-being.
The parents are really worried about broader general health. The young person or the child is often worried about whether they fit in with their friends and mates, whether they get bullied. So in fact, that's often a trigger for parents seeking help for their child because they're being taunted at school about their weight. So, but I think the concept of weight-related health is a really good one. I often use the word uh, a high BMI before I explain what that is to a patient. I tend to avoid the word obesity because it can be so misunderstood and
Mm.
has so many elements to it that really weigh people down. Sorry, that was another, didn't mean to make that sort of joke, but really can actually influence people's understanding of what you're trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And, hopefully other people listening to that will realize that using inappropriate words can make the patient sitting in front of you switch off because they're feeling like not being understood. So I was going to ask you, why do we need to talk about however we define this medical issue related to the amount of fat tissue in your body? But you've observed it clinically, but at that big picture global level, why did there need to be this world committee? I believe it was at least 2 years that you spent on the committee to come up with a new definition for whatever word was going to replace obesity, but for that condition. Why did that need to happen across so many countries?
I think there's been quite a bit of confusion. A lot of people say, is obesity a risk factor? Surely it's just a risk factor for other diseases. Um, or is it a disease in itself? And is there a difference between that? Don't they both deserve treatment? I think the answer is yes, but we'll look at that. So there was confusion about that. And we felt that actually defining obesity as a disease would actually help give it more medical legitimacy. There's a lot of challenges in health services around people with obesity being able to access treatment and services. There's so many out of pocket costs for people with obesity in accessing treatment, which in Australia they wouldn't need to do if they had a raft of many other diseases. So I think there's just embedded stigma in our health system and the broader community, and being able to clarify what is this, when is obesity a disease, and what does that mean for our treatment plans and how we would treat people. That's where this came from.
So can I just go straight then to, okay, so when is your body composition and your level of adiposity, which just means how much fat and where it's stored in your body, when is that then considered a disease and this will need treatment? And, you start with your GP and it'll help your GP go, yep, we know treatment's needed, we can begin to make a plan.
Well, you're quite right. You have to start to have high body fat to start with. And we've also said, and it may well be that you've got an abnormal fat distribution, so a high waist or a high waist to height ratio, so that you've got, which is essentially a measure of internal body fat or body fat around internal organs. So you have to have that. But when does that flip into being a disease? So we're calling it, when does it become clinical obesity? And we said, well, you have to have a health problem related to that
Mm.
high body fat. Um, so it's that which distinguishes it from what we're calling preclinical obesity, which is high body fat, but where there is preserved health, no ongoing illness there. So we're just trying to distinguish between them, those two things. It's clearly on a gradient, on a line, because you don't just automatically one day have preclinical obesity and the next day clinical obesity, but we're trying to clarify what is clinical obesity, what can we recognize. So it's essentially high body fat with health problems.
Okay, so this then is going to help individual people and, GPs, for example, say, oh, I've just seen my patient today. Yes, there's a high number on the scales. I look up the chart. It says they're high BMI, but blood pressure's normal. They're well, no mental health issues, can do absolutely everything. And so, we don't have to say, oh no, God must do something, must get you on a whole range of drugs, and the patient saying, I feel well, I don't feel I need to do anything about my health, and the doctor's able to say, yeah, absolutely, you're well. It's just you don't have your fat stored in the places where it does do things to your health. Is that kind of how it should be used?
I think that's a really good example of that. But even taking that person who has preclinical obesity, so no health problems, you might take some additional history and obtain a story that I'm currently really well with my high body fat, but I'm a bit worried because my mum and dad and my grandparents all developed type 2 diabetes or had premature heart disease early on, and I might be at risk because they were also big people. And so
Yeah.
you might start to nuance that. So you might take into account, well, this person with preclinical obesity, everyone in their family lived to the 90s, they're completely well. Why are we even thinking about this at this stage? But then you might say this other person with preclinical obesity does have a high risk family history or something else. We might need to monitor that and keep that um, in back of our mind in the future, because this person might be further down, might be at risk for health problems down the track.
But I do think that that helps individuals. I have talked to a couple of medical specialists, including Dr. Kath Williams, who's the endocrinologist for a tertiary management service, whom I know you know really well, trying to get information that people can use too to help them work out whether they need to go and see a doctor or whether they need to do anything. But one of the things that sort of come up in those conversations, Louise, is that sometimes people say, you know what, I actually don't know what my family history is because they don't, when they get together at Christmas or birthdays, actually talk about what medications people might be on or know what grandparents passed away from. And I've met people who are adopted and say, I have no idea. So in that instance, that chat with their GP is even more important because of other, I guess, investigations a GP could do.
The GP may well will look at the patient and you've given examples of looking at blood pressure, but you'd also look to see if people have any signs or symptoms that may indicate that they've got heart failure, or that they're having problems with their hips and knee joints because of excess weight on those, or if they're having problems sleeping at night because they may be developing obstructive sleep apnea. That sort of clinical history of a person is, and clinical examination of a person is really important, and you may do investigations to look to see what's happening with the liver function or cholesterol and so on. All of those are important. But one of the things that we've included in the definition is if people are having problems with activities of daily living. So things like toileting, showering, dressing, those sorts of things are things that would raise a red flag and saying this heavy weight may be a problem for this person because they can't do what they'd like to do. It, mm,
And Louise, I think that sort of flags to me one very important aspect of this document. You know, some people are going, oh, you're medicalising it. Yes, for a reason. But I think, do you believe that there's a chance that this document will actually impact on policies? And why I'm asking that is because, you know, many years ago, I actually worked clinically as a dietitian, long, long time in hospitals. And then obesity was not recognised as a medical condition. And so in our dietetic department, we were not to see people who wanted help with managing body weight because it was seen as only an individual choice, if you like. And now it's like we flipped all the way around, hopefully. So, do you believe there's a chance that this is going to flow on to the ability to access the services and the support and medications, whatever it is that people need to improve their weight related health?
I'm an eternal optimist. I very much hope that this will be the case, and it's the reason that we did it. I think the more that we can do to highlight that there's a very strong biological basis to clinical obesity, and that there's ways of being able to identify people who have the health problems associated with their high body fat, and then that those people deserve to be at least offered options for treatment depending on severity, health problems, and their own individual choices. We need to move to that. As you alluded to, our health system in multiple countries, including in Australia, aren't very helpful for people with obesity. There's a lot of embedded stigma and lots of barriers in accessing good care, whether that's multidisciplinary team support, seeing a dietitian, seeing a physiotherapist or clinical psychologist to help with some health habits, or whether it's accessing obesity management medications or even bariatric surgery. So much of that at the moment involves some or a lot of out-of-pocket costs for individuals, which means there's a lot of inequity in accessing care. And yet for other chronic diseases, we don't have those barriers in our countries.
Yeah, it's quite amazing, isn't it? I think we'd be up in arms if we said, you know, people were diagnosed with cancer and it was just good luck as to whether or not you can negotiate or navigate your own treatment plan. But we actually that is exactly what's happening when it comes to weight related health. And, you know, it kind of feels like, why aren't we marching in the streets about this? So, maybe that's what the Lancet Commission document in, you know, all of the organisations coming together and saying this is a medical issue, needs medical approach, you know, and in time perhaps we'll bring all the countries on board.
I very much hope so. I hope it's a good step in the direction towards decreasing stigma and increasing knowledge of what clinical obesity is. A lot. It's not just the general public. It's not just the doctors and healthcare professionals. It's policy decision makers and many, many more who need to be convinced and to understand that this is a very real issue. I know that you and I, as clinicians and researchers, see this, but many people don't. And it's very easy to bring just a general stigmatizing view about obesity to your understanding of this when it's very different.
So can we just talk about that word stigma and bias? Because I think people living in larger bodies who've been denied treatment because it's just assumed, to be attributed to their weight, or or assume that they're not interested in weight. I don't think people who don't live in a larger body necessarily know that that happens or believe it happens unless they've observed it. So how does that play out? What is stigma or bias?
Um, it's making assumptions or having judgments about an individual based solely on the way that they look. And then that influences options for treatment, accessing care, job opportunities, or whatever it is that you're looking at. Obesity is something that we can or think that we can see just by looking at an individual. So it's very easy for people to make assumptions and about a person. I'm just looking at a person, I can't see if they've got a whole raft of health issues, but I can normally tell if they've got certainly severe obesity. And the general public, health professionals of all sorts, make, and school teachers, if we're talking about children, make assumptions about people based on that, and they will ascribe moral values that are completely wrong.
Louise, I'm going to tell you a story. So every year I teach our students the module in nutrition and dietetics on obesity, and I talk about stigma and bias. So I actually get them to do the implicit bias association test, and I'll put it as a link in the show notes because I think it's really important for people to do that. And it's really interesting that the students, at least some of them, are willing to admit that they didn't think they had any bias until they did that test. And in raising their awareness, almost thankful that, well, at least they know about that. And I find it really humanizing to retake it every year before I give the lecture, just to remind myself how even when you know about it, it can creep in if you're not on to watching it. And then the other little story I wanted to tell you is we have this online module. It's called The Science of Weight Loss, Dispelling Diet Myths. And we were asked by a community organisation if we could get the general public to evaluate it for the presence of stigma. And they found one little spot where they thought we could change the wording, and we did that. And the interesting feedback we got was that because we then added a module on weight related stigma, and we got feedback from people saying they didn't realize there was this other category called internalized weight stigma, and explained to it as that you get treated like that for so long that you start to believe these terrible messages that people are giving you that it is your own fault. And so we were really pleased then that it was empowering in talking about it that people were able to say, I don't deserve to be treated like that. And it's actually not their issue, it's the person treating them that way. So I think I'm really glad that Australia has got this on the radar nationally, but I think we've got to get that message out there to the general public to check your bias. So that's going straight in the show notes, a link to that test.
Fantastic, Claire, and thank you for being such an advocate for this issue. I can tell you that the experience of stigma occurs throughout the health system and so it might be when you check into a clinic or just even like whether there are comfortable enough chairs for you to sit in, but it's also about how people talk with you, whether your health issues are either ascribed only to your weight or whether your weight is not taken into account. Um, I've certainly had parents of my patients come, so the parents themselves may be big people, and they've actually said, I was very worried coming here because I thought that we'd be blamed, those
All
sorts
right.
of things. So people actually choose not to go to treatment services because they're anticipating they're going to have maybe a humiliating or an embarrassing or a blaming session for people. And I think it's really important to be able to say to people, it's not your fault, um, but but you do have the ability to be able to potentially make some changes with our support. So the idea about not blaming yourself for being in the situation, but then looking positively towards what the future might be. But it's really sobering to reflect that because of negative experiences in their family, at school, in the general public, and in various parts of the health system, people with obesity who may benefit from treatment or who have a range of other health issues feel reluctant to go to the health system because they anticipate having a bad experience.
It's really quite tragic, isn't it? Especially given now with the rise of effective medications. So, can we sort of fast forward now? So, now, Louise, we're in the future. All of the governments now have their policies in place. You can actually access treatment. Amazing. Imagine if that was the case. You can easily access treatment. You can go along to a treatment, and it doesn't matter if you live up here in Newcastle, you can still get treatment, or you live in a country town. You don't have to only live in a big city. So, what did this commission kind of suggest this pathway should then be for people who now have clinical obesity? What should people be able to expect to access?
We didn't go into detail into this, so our job wasn't to actually say this is the treatment plan that you therefore follow, although many of us on the commission are ourselves clinicians and people involved in treatment. What we wanted to see was that there'd be good, respectful interaction with their healthcare professional, whether it's a GP or other form of health professional, and there'd be an assessment about the amount of health problems they have, whether they had clinical obesity or preclinical obesity, and we'd hope that there'd be then support to get into the treatment plan that that person with their treating health professionals had decided. So we'd hope that there'd be a seamless approach to this, and that people with clinical obesity, as opposed to those who didn't yet have health problems, may be prioritised for access to treatment if there were problems with otherwise problems in accessing treatment. We'd hoped that there'd be far less, that there'd be no stigma towards people with obesity, that we would say we would treat people with obesity as if they had a raft of other diseases. You've got this health problem, we've got treatment options for you, let's work with you in providing that treatment service. So that's what we hope will happen. I know I'm an eternal optimist, and I know you're an optimist as well,
Yep.
Claire. So we're going to work towards that.
Yeah. So one of the things is, and I imagine because yours is a tertiary children's hospital, which means that people might have already taken their children to the GP or even to a pediatrician before they come to a specialist centre like yours. So I wanted to know, in your experience, how common is it then for people with this, metabolic biology that means they're more susceptible to developing obesity and especially clinical obesity, so with the medical problems? How often is that they've tried everything, they've done the diets, they've done the exercise group, they've done all that, and then the biology, even if they've had some success, the biology like comes back to like, nip you in the heels going, well, I'm still here. So is that common, or do people just don't get any help at all before they get to see you?
Unfortunately, I think there are a large number of people who can't really access any effective treatment prior to coming to a tertiary centre, and that drives me mad at times because I know that there are some services in primary care and secondary care that would be really good for some people. And there's a bit of the luck of the draw as to where you live and who you've seen as to whether you can access, say, really good multidisciplinary team support in your local area, or other types of support. As we look to the future, we can see that obesity management medications are going to become more available and I hope more accessible. And there is certainly evidence for adolescents of their effectiveness for some groups of adolescents with obesity in helping with not just improving body fat, but also some health problems. And we can see this very much the case in adults. So I think in the future, there'll be potentially easier pathways to obesity management medications for adolescents. And there's a subgroup of adolescents with more severe obesity who may benefit from metabolic bariatric surgery. Again, not a large number of people. The reality is that everybody, the vast, needs access, though, to support for health behaviours, for clinical psychology support potentially, but dietetic, physical activity, screen time support. And we have some great health professionals, most of them allied health professionals, some maybe nurses, who are really good at supporting people in this and making changes. And indeed, interventions in childhood and even in adolescence in those areas have better outcomes than they do in adults. And that makes sense because if behaviours are more entrenched, they're harder to change. So there's a real opportunity to really provide good support, allied health support, other support for health behaviour change. I tend not to use the word lifestyle change because it makes it sound as if lifestyle is a chosen choice of a person, and these are much more complex issues. And it's not just, oh, you didn't know that you had to do this, I'm just going to tell you this and now you're going to go away and do this. We need, as health professionals, to say these are some of the health behaviours that you may like to work with us, we'd like to help you with, or which ones would you like help with? How can we help you with time? How can we stay in touch and support you? And that needs really good health professionals, I think, to support people, but they don't have to be just in a tertiary children's hospital. They should be far more widespread.
And Louise, now I'm going to give a plug to my team. That's actually part of the reason for creating the website, No Money, No Time. When we engaged, with people, and this was actually young adults, they said to us, we do care about food, but we haven't got any money and we haven't got any time. Can you solve that? Went, wow, actually, great name for a website, but we're pretty sure we can solve that because that's the barriers for people, busy jobs, trying to feed the family, trying to pay the bills and things like that. So I think that's really key. Someone threw away a line to me recently. Oh, aren't you worried about those medications going to do you out of a job? And like, wow, wouldn't that be great? But I think the key thing is we know that nutrition, like physical activity, affects so many aspects of health and well-being. And like for No Money, No Time, we've got this quiz in there, the healthy eating quiz, and you get brief personalised feedback. And a common reason people do it is because they want to feel better in themselves. And so, hearing that from people makes us realize how much your life is really driven by how well you're feeling in yourself. So that's what we really try to address. And the other key thing, Louise, that we've seen with the medications in some of the literature reviews we're doing is that there people really need support because they lose interest in food. And so if you're just eating, unhealthy food once a day, we're going to see a re-emergence of some of the deficiency diseases like scurvy, and there have been case reports of those. So I'm just giving a plug for me and my team, but it's so, as you said, it's so complex. But what do you think needs to happen next? Like if someone's listening to this and they go, oh, I really want someone to take a serious interest in improving my weight-related health, what's got to happen next?
For that individual, I'd really suggest that they contact their hopefully very supportive family doctor and talk about options. And I'm hoping that that family doctor will understand some of the pathways to getting support in the local region, so which might be around the sort of way in which they may be able to access care from, say, dietitians or psychologists or community, etc. But there may also be community organisations that they could go to. So I always suggest going to the GP because you want to make sure that you don't have some significant health issues that may also need to be
Yeah.
addressed and may need to be prioritised. If people themselves have been really dealing with weight-related health issues for a long time. I just really, I'm not quite sure how to emphasize this enough, but you really need support from caring health professionals who have experience in this area. And if you're not getting it, maybe you need to ask around to try to find the right sort of health professional. I think many health professionals really want to do the right by their in this area for their patients, but make sure that you advocate for yourself or advocate for a friend who needs some help finding the
Okay.
right pathway.
And what about if you're the health professional listening and you go, I really want to work more in this area and be really well informed? What can they do?
Well, I'd certainly encourage them to read some of the articles that are coming out. There are health professional training programs offered by different groups. Even something like the Obesity Collective has a, you know, just a small video around issues to do with um, stigma, but have a look, depending on where you are, there's going to be a range of training options available for you. I think there's more training options if you're a GP than if you're a range of other health types of doctors, and also I suspect dietitians have more training options than other allied health, but ask around, check, because it's so important that you get.
Yeah, that's really true. I can put links to those in the show notes as well, particularly the Obesity Collective. Um, Last year, when I went to the Australian and New Zealand Obesity Society National Conference, I was lucky enough at the function to sit with this group of GPs who were part of the College of GPs special interest group in obesity. And they were telling me something that I think is really exciting. They said there's already 2,000 GPs in that special interest group, and a number of them are becoming specialist GPs in obesity treatment. The way we see the skin cancer specialist GP clinics. I thought that's actually so exciting. And one of them was for the country, and she was telling me that the GPs in the region love her because they are able to send their patients to her. She can give the comprehensive assessment and treatment plan because some of them were booked out for months, and then patients get their assessment, get their plan, and then they can come back into their usual GP management. And that GP's been helped by now the specialist GP who works also with endocrinologists and surgeons and things. So I think that's a really exciting development for Australia. And perhaps, people can ask around or ask their GP, is there a specialist GP who can be the intermediary for everyone?
That sounds like a great opportunity, and I think I'm hoping that over the next few years we'll see new sorts of pathways open up because this is a very common issue, and we need to be able to support people and have pathways for people to be able to access the care that we know will help so many of them.
So, Louise, I do have, one last question, and I want to come back to the Lancet Commission. I guess that's step one in terms of, what needs to be done. And congratulations to you and all the people who worked for those years to bring that together. And I can't imagine what it must take to get 75 organisations to sign off on that. But and I know you're an optimist, but do you believe that this clinical obesity is an issue that the world can come together to solve?
I think we're still getting our heads around it. Just letting people know that at the time we're doing this, it's only just like 4 weeks since the report was published. So it takes quite a bit of time to help a broader range of health professionals understand why we had that. I think some people in the broader community around the world wanted the Lancet Commission, which they knew about. They didn't know the details, but they knew it was happening. I think some people thought that there'd be almost like clinical practice guidelines that would come from that. And they'd say, but you've just said this is clinical obesity and this is preclinical obesity, but what do we do with people with these health problems? We talk about it very generally, but we didn't come up with a step-by-step guide, nor were we planning to do so. And the other issue is people say, but I've already got a way of prioritising those who've got severe versus less severe obesity. And how does yours fit into this? And again, we weren't there as a grading system or a staging system. We were there to say, when do you start to worry about it, and when are you much less worried about it? When do you have health problems with your high body fat, and when do you not have health problems? So I actually think these can actually be integrated, these sort of different views can be integrated very well. And there's a lot of people working in that area, but it takes a while for everybody. It's only been a month. It takes a while for people to understand exactly what you mean and what's going on. And I can understand why people wanted everything in the world to be solved around the issue of obesity with this Lancet Commission, and we've just come
Yeah.
with a more constrained approach.
Yeah, it's the beginning though, isn't it? And if you
Yeah.
think about the ripple effects, now it gives the opportunity for other countries to anchor off, this global statement and take it from there. So, Professor Louise Baur, thank you for taking the time to talk to us on Nutrition Science Bites today.
It's been a pleasure, Claire, as always.